Don't skip this video. A simple man from the countryside arrived with an envelope in his pocket and ended up becoming the center of a transformation that shook the largest agribusiness group in America. Humiliated in the reception area of his own son's company, he taught a lesson that no Harvard diploma could teach. And what was inside that envelope changed everything. Subscribe to our channel now and discover how respect can be the most powerful seed to transform people, companies, and destinies. The sun had barely appeared on the horizon when Mr. Robert Miller woke up. As he had done every day for more than 5 decades, he got up before dawn, drank strong coffee filtered through cloth, and put on his worn leather boots. The old straw hat, companion of so many journeys under the relentless sun of the Kansas plains, rested on the carved wooden coat rack his grandfather had made. Today would be different. He wasn't going to the corral or to the soybean plantation that stretched as far as the eye could see. His destination was New York, the metropolis his son talked about so much. "Are you sure you don't want me to go?" "With you, Dad?" The voice of Sarah, his daughter-in-law, echoed from the kitchen. "You've never been to the big city alone." "My dear, I got this far without GPS or a cell phone. God willing, I'll get there and come back safe and sound." Robert smiled, revealing well-cared-for teeth that contrasted with his sun-tanned skin. "Besides, I want to surprise my son." What Sarah didn't know, not even Thomas, his son, was that this trip was more than a paternal visit. It was a test. Robert tucked into his checkered shirt pocket the brown envelope containing documents capable of changing the future of hundreds of people. Hope Farm, with its nearly 12,000 acres of fertile land in the Missouri River Valley, had been coveted by multinational corporations for years. Now, the company that Thomas headed, Agri-USA Solutions, was about to close a historic deal to expand its logistics operations using part of that land. For the market, it was just another billion-dollar deal. For Robert, it was the legacy of generations. 4 hours later, the interstate bus stopped at the Port Authority bus terminal. Robert felt the immediate impact of the big city, the heavy air, the incessant noise, the rush of people. He checked the address written on an already crumpled piece of paper and took a taxi. "Fifth Avenue 1578, please," he said to the driver, a middle-aged man who observed him with curiosity in the rearview mirror. "Are you going to Agri-USA? Do you work there?" asked the taxi driver, noting the simple clothes and the straw hat that Robert had insisted on keeping on his head. "No, my son works there," he replied, without revealing that works meant presiding over one of the largest agribusiness companies in America. The immense mirrored building on Fifth Avenue seemed to swallow the sky. Robert felt a tightness in his chest, not of intimidation but of contained pride. His son, raised milking cows and collecting eggs from the henhouse, now commanded that empire. But Thomas always repeated that he had learned everything he knew about management by watching his father run the farm with honesty and respect. The air-conditioned reception of the corporate building greeted him with the typical coldness of aseptic environments. Robert approached the counter, where 3 receptionists were frantically typing on their computers. "Good morning, miss. I'd like to speak with Dr. Thomas Miller." The receptionist, a young woman with impeccably straightened hair and long nails, raised her eyes for a second and went back to staring at the monitor. "The president doesn't see anyone without an appointment. Do you have a scheduled time?" Her tone was automatic, emotionless. "No, I don't, but I'm his father. I came from Kansas and—" He was interrupted by a loud laugh. A man of approximately 35 years old, wearing a perfectly fitted Italian suit, approached with an air of superiority. It was Richard Jenkins, the company's financial director, known for his boundless ambition. "Did you hear that, Patricia? He said he's the president's father." The laugh echoed through the lobby, attracting glances. "Look, Mr. What's your name? Again?" "Robert Miller, at your service," the older man replied, maintaining his dignity. "Mr. Miller, this is no place for jokes. Dr. Thomas Miller graduated from Harvard, comes from a traditional New York family, and certainly doesn't have a father. Well, with all due respect, like you." Richard gestured, pointing to the visitor's simple clothes. "I suggest you go back to your little farm, your barnyard, or wherever you came from." The lobby fell silent. Some employees observed the scene, embarrassed, others with complicit smiles. Robert just lowered his head, adjusting the brim of his hat. There was no anger in his eyes, only a serene dignity that Richard, in his arrogance, could not recognize. "Excuse me then, miss, I don't want to cause problems," said Robert, turning to leave. At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened. Thomas Miller, with his impeccable navy blue suit and the same determined eyes as his father, froze at the scene. He had just come down to receive an important client when he spotted his father, the man who had financed his studies by selling part of the cattle, who had taught him the value of one's word, being humiliated in the lobby of his own company. "Dad?" Thomas's voice echoed through the now completely silent environment. Richard immediately turned pale. His gaze jumped from the president to the old man in the straw hat, connecting the dots with growing horror. "Thomas, my son?" said Robert, with a discreet smile that hid a lesson not yet revealed. "I came to personally bring you those documents you asked for." The president of Agri-USA crossed the lobby with firm steps, strongly embracing his father in front of all those present. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming? I would have sent someone to pick you up at the airport. I wanted to surprise you, and from what I see..." Robert looked discreetly at Richard, still petrified. "The surprise was bigger than I imagined." What no one there knew was that that brown envelope contained not only the deed to the land for the company's expansion. There was much more at stake, and the next few hours would forever change the destiny of Agri-USA and everyone involved in that embarrassing scene. The silence on the 15th floor of the Agri-USA building was as heavy as the air before a storm on the plains. Thomas watched through the panoramic window the city that never stops, while his father, Mr. Robert, comfortably seated in the leather armchair, waited with the patience of one who has learned to respect the cycles of nature. "Dad, you can't. Imagine how I felt when I saw that scene downstairs." Thomas broke the silence, turning to face the man who had given him life and values. "Richard is waiting in the anteroom. I'm going to fire him right now." Robert placed the brown envelope on the glass table and adjusted the straw hat on his lap. "Before you make any decision, my son, I want you to understand why I came personally." On the other side of the door, Richard Jenkins waited, sweat running down his forehead despite the air conditioning. Next to him, Jennifer Morgan, Thomas's executive assistant, observed him with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. For years, she had witnessed the arrogance of that man, his contempt for employees he considered inferior, his political maneuvers in the company's corridors. "He's going to fire me, isn't he?" asked Richard, more to himself than to Jennifer. "Dr. Miller is a fair man," she replied diplomatically, "but if there's one thing he doesn't tolerate, it's disrespect." Inside the office, Robert explained to his son the true reasons for his visit. Hope Farm wasn't just a piece of land. It was the symbol of a philosophy of life, built on respect, dignified work, and valuing people. The 5,000 families who worked directly or indirectly on the Miller lands weren't mere employees, but partners in a journey. These lands that you want to buy to expand the company. They're not just acres, Thomas. They're stories. When your grandfather arrived here, fleeing the economic depression, all he had was the willingness to work. Today, we have responsibility for all these families. Thomas listened attentively, recognizing in his father's words the roots of his own business philosophy, although recently the pressure from shareholders and fierce market competition had distanced him from these principles. "The envelope I brought contains the deed to the land, as we agreed. But I also brought something else." Robert took out another document, a special clause that I drafted with the help of Mr. Hayes, our old lawyer. Agri-USA will only be able to use our land if it implements a code of conduct based on the values we've always defended: respect for people's origins, appreciation of diversity, and social commitment to surrounding communities. Thomas's eyes shone with a mixture of surprise and admiration. His father, without academic training, but endowed with a wisdom that no university could teach, had just given him a lesson in corporate governance and social responsibility. "And there's more," continued Robert. "I came without warning because I wanted to see with my own eyes how this company treats ordinary people. I didn't come as your father, I came as any American, a man from the countryside trying to be heard." Thomas stood up, the decision made. He opened the door and faced Richard, who immediately stood up, pale. Dr. Miller, I can explain. I didn't know he was your father. I would never. Richard, please come in, interrupted Thomas with surprising calmness. I want you to get to know my father better. Confused, Richard entered the office. He had expected immediate dismissal, not an invitation for conversation. Robert Miller observed him with serenity, without any trace of resentment. Mr. Miller, I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. It was an unforgivable mistake on my part, and— Sit down, young man, said the farmer, indicating the chair in front of him. I didn't come here to receive apologies. During the next hour, Robert told his story, how he had started with a small property, facing droughts, pests, and the distrust of banks. How he had built, inch by inch, one of the largest productive properties in the Midwest. How he had invested in the education of his only son, selling part of the herd to pay for university abroad. And mainly, how he treated each farm worker with the same respect, regardless of their position. Richard listened, initially out of obligation, then with genuine interest. This man of simple appearance spoke of international commodity negotiations, sustainable soil management techniques, agricultural diversification strategies, with the authority of someone who mastered the subject through personal experience, not theories. Dr. Thomas, said Robert finally, turning to his son, what happened today in the lobby wasn't just this young man's fault. It was the result of a culture. On the farm, when a calf is born weak, we don't blame the animal, but review the management of the herd. Thomas immediately understood the message. The problem went beyond Richard. It was systemic. Richard, you're not fired, announced Thomas to the surprise of the financial director. But from today on, your role in the company will change. You will lead a new department, community relations and social governance. But I'm a finance specialist. I don't understand anything about. Exactly why, interrupted Thomas. You will spend the next 3 months at Hope Farm, learning from my father and the families who live there. Afterwards, you will implement the new code of conduct that will be included in the land purchase contract. Richard's expression mixed shock and disbelief. 3 months in rural Kansas, away from starred restaurants, exclusive clubs, business, meetings in air-conditioned rooms. And if I refuse? He asked, recovering part of his defensive posture. Then yes, you will be fired, replied Thomas without hesitation. And believe me, with the reputation you've built around here and the way you treated my father, you'll have difficulty finding another position in the market. At that moment, Jennifer entered the office hurriedly, without knocking. Dr. Miller, excuse the interruption, but the board members are all in the meeting room. They heard about your father's visit and want to meet him personally before the vote on the expansion. Robert smiled. His plan was working better than he had imagined. Let's go then, he said, getting up and putting his straw hat back on. But first, Richard needs to make a decision. Everyone looked at the financial director, who for the first time in his meteoric career faced a crossroads where his charm, family connections and diplomas would have no value. What would define his future was something much more basic, the ability to acknowledge mistakes and learn from them. I accept the challenge, he finally replied, to everyone's surprise in the room. When do we start? Tomorrow itself, replied Robert, with a serene smile. The bus to Kansas City leaves at 7 a.m. Don't worry about fine clothes or laptops. On the farm, you'll need other tools. As they walked towards the boardroom, no one could predict the profound transformations that decision would trigger, not only in Richard's life, but in the entire structure of Agri-USA, and in the company's relationship with the communities that would be impacted by its expansion. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at the Agri-USA headquarters. The Kansas sky was dawning, painted in orange and pink, when Richard Jenkins woke up to the singing of birds. His hands, once soft and cared for in exclusive spas, now displayed calluses from someone who learned the value of manual labor. His face, tanned by the prairie sun, had lost the perpetual tension of high-ranking executives, replaced by a serenity he had never known in his years of corporate career. He left the small wooden house he occupied at Hope Farm and walked to the corral where Mr. Robert was already milking the cows with the skill of decades of practice. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Need any help?" The old farmer smiled, recognizing the transformation of the man who, months earlier, had humiliated him in the mirrored lobby of his son's company. "Come, young man, these two still need to be milked, and then we have the meeting with the Small Producers Association." What had begun as a punishment had transformed into the greatest life lesson for Richard. In the first weeks, he had faced each task with reluctance and discomfort, waking up before dawn, working under the scorching sun, dealing with animals and crops, talking to people who could barely read, but possessed a wisdom that no MBA could teach. Gradually, something changed within him. The respect that he had initially offered out of fear and obligation became genuine. He learned to listen to stories of families who had cared for that land for generations. He understood how the natural cycles of agriculture were a perfect metaphor for business cycles, with one fundamental difference. In the countryside, no one achieved success alone or at the expense of others. Meanwhile, in New York, Agri-USA was undergoing a silent revolution. Thomas Miller had implemented the code of conduct inspired by his father's teachings, internally renamed the Roots Protocol. More than a formal document, it was a business philosophy that valued people's origins, respect for differences, and a genuine commitment to sustainable development. In the president's office, framed in a simple hardwood frame, the brown envelope that Mr. Robert had brought that day represented more than $1 billion contract. It was a symbol of the company's new direction. "Jennifer, please call the directors for the video conference with Richard," Thomas asked. His assistant. "I want everyone to see the results of the pilot project at Hope Farm." On the screen in the meeting room appeared the transformed face of Richard, alongside Mr. Robert and various representatives from local communities. The contrast between this image and the arrogant man from months ago could not be more evident. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," began Richard, with a humility that would have been unthinkable in the former financial director, "I have the honor of presenting the preliminary results of the Roots program, implemented here in the region that will receive our logistics expansion. The numbers exceeded all expectations. The involvement of local communities, respect for traditional knowledge, and the appreciation of collaborators regardless of their origin or academic background resulted in exceptional indicators of productivity, engagement, and satisfaction. But the greatest result cannot be measured in spreadsheets," continued Richard, surprising everyone with his eloquence devoid of corporate jargon. "It's the transformation of lives, starting with mine." At that moment, the director narrated his personal journey, how he had arrived at the farm full of prejudices and certainties, and how each day in that environment had taught him a new lesson about humility, respect, and purpose. "I formally propose that the Roots Protocol be expanded to all Agri-USA operations, not just as a competitive differential, but as our essence as an organization." After the meeting, which ended with unanimous approval of the proposal, Thomas remained alone in the room, contemplating the photograph of his father that now decorated one of the walls. The phone rang. "Dr. Miller, Sustainable Business Magazine. Here's on the line. They want an exclusive interview about the revolution in the organizational culture of Agri-USA." Thomas smiled. "Tell them I appreciate the interest, but I suggest they interview the true person responsible for this transformation, Mr. Robert Miller, a man who never needed a position or title to lead." 3 months later, the inauguration of the first Agri-USA Logistics Center on Hope Farmland brought together executives in suits, rural workers, local small producers, and government authorities. The event, covered by the national press, had become a symbol of a new business model in American agribusiness. Instead of the traditional red ribbon, the inauguration ceremony was marked by the planting of a young oak tree, a symbol of the American heartland. Mr. Robert, Thomas, and Richard, side by side, held the small shovel together, symbolizing the union between tradition and innovation, countryside and city, simplicity and sophistication. "This oak will grow strong like our partnership," declared Mr. Robert for the cameras and microphones. "And like any good seed, it will spread its fruits to germinate new oaks across America." After the ceremonies, when the illustrious guests had already departed in their luxury cars and helicopters, Richard found Mr. Robert sitting on the farmhouse porch, contemplating the sunset. "Mr. Miller, I need to tell you something that I've kept inside all these months." The old farmer indicated the chair beside him with a simple gesture that Richard now understood as an invitation to equality. "That day in the company lobby, I didn't just humiliate you. I truly believed that people like you didn't deserve to be in that environment, that success and power were for people like me, with education, with the right connections, with the right appearance." Robert listened. In silence, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was tinting the sky red. "You could have destroyed me at that moment. Just one word from you and my career would have been over. Instead, you offered me the greatest opportunity of my life. Why?" The old man removed his straw hat, revealing the white hair that framed a face marked not only by age, but by accumulated wisdom. "Because, my son, the land teaches us that you don't reap what you don't sow. If I had responded to your humiliation with vengeance, I would only have perpetuated the cycle. I preferred to plant a different seed." Richard felt his eyes water, something he would never have allowed in his days as a ruthless executive. "On the day you disrespected me, I didn't just see arrogance. I saw a lost man who had built his identity on hollow values. And I remembered a lesson that my father taught me when I was a boy. Never judge a man by a single action, but by his willingness to learn from his mistakes." The last ray of sunlight disappeared on the horizon, giving way to the first star of the night. "You know, Richard, what impressed me most about you? It wasn't your ability to learn to milk cows or plant seedlings. It was your courage to question everything you believed in and rebuild yourself as a person." The next morning, when Thomas arrived for a routine visit to the farm, he found his father and Richard already in the field, enthusiastically discussing plans to expand the training program for young farmers in the region, an initiative that had been the former financial director's idea and was now becoming the flagship of Agri-USA's social responsibility policy. "Son, come see what Richard has developed," called Robert with evident pride. "An app that connects small producers directly to buyers, eliminating intermediaries." The idea came up after he heard about Mr. Johnson's difficulties in selling artisanal cheese at a fair price. Thomas observed admiringly how his former financial director, now community relations director, explained to local farmers in simple and respectful language how technology could be allied with traditional practices. "Mr. Miller," commented Thomas when they were alone, "you achieved the impossible. You transformed one of the most arrogant executives in New York into a true advocate for family farming." The old farmer smiled, adjusting the straw hat that had become a symbol of Agri-USA's new philosophy. "Son, there is no land so arid that it cannot flourish when it receives the right seed, at the right time, with the right care. People are like soil. Sometimes they need to be turned over for the best in them to come to the surface." The brown envelope, which had once contained not only documents but a life lesson, was now framed in the reception area of Agri-USA headquarters, along with a phrase handwritten by Robert Miller himself. "You don't measure a man by the suit he wears, but by the respect he sows." Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Mr. Robert, Thomas, and Richard has touched your hearts and shown how respect and humility can transform lives and companies. For more American narratives that explore essential values of our culture, we've prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking on the icon to the left of your screen. If this story about dignity and respect touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Like this video and share it with those who need to rediscover the value of people beyond appearances. Each week we bring new stories that celebrate the richness of the human experience in its complexity. What did you think of the ending? Tell us in the comments. Your opinion is fundamental for us to continue creating content that moves and transforms.